And that is kind of strange, because as I studied as a designer, and I still use that word when it's useful, because an artist is not taken seriously in some cases, such as working with the municipality. You're told and taught that what you're doing is making information acceptable for people and more easily understandable, but at the end of the day, most people who deal with this kind of technical language don't take it seriously, and they trust more this kind of technical hallucination than an artistic one. And then I want to talk about space, which you mentioned about this artistic representation of space. And I'd like to say first that I don't think that's art at all. I think these are just visualizations of space. And I have some images. I imagine it's a smaller table, so I made some small cards, but it's okay. Somewhere in here there's a bunch of images from space. Yeah, actually it would be cool if everybody just like... No, like that at once.
Let's make an awkward table. Let's try to get
You want us to just stand around?
No, because I will constantly throw images around and stand for
You could also like hold them up.
yeah, okay.
Well, that's actually good. Just bring your chairs.
Yeah, so just...
No one's sitting there. I think it's this one. I don't know. I was in Herman today. Did you guys see that? Yes.
So the project that Nina mentioned I was doing, which I will talk about later, is mostly about the history of communication and how we relate to the technology we use to communicate, and how that turns into social structures and architecture and even how we behave in space and our relationship to space in general, which I will get to, but space as an outer space is also a really interesting place to research, because this is one of the most important, I think, kind of litmus tests of how we as a society view things which we cannot see. How do we represent them? And I don't just mean in terms of gathering data and turning it into images. I mean in terms of how the satellites are made, what kind of instruments are put in them, the media attention that things get, the approaches that space agencies take in sharing information. And over the last 50 years, there's been an absolutely enormous change in how that works, and it's really super interesting. I should have made some more images of it, maybe, but originally, when we sent satellites into space, it was mostly just to understand if something could live in there, and there was maybe some audio recordings with the monkey in space. This is basically just radio communications, and we had to imagine using charts where the satellite was and where it would land, but further than that we had no images from it. And then at some point when we start making readings with radio telescopes, pointing them back at the Earth to try and create images, we end up with things like this, which is an image from Landsat, the very first Landsat, which was the first satellite which pointed back at the Earth. And, the first official satellite that pointed back at the Earth, there was a spy satellite. But this is a satellite used to measure different vegetations and different land covers so that people can try and find minerals from space. So what you see here is a readout which you could buy very cheaply, and it was sent through a fax machine back in the 60s. which represented forests and different densities of clay, etc. But this really clearly demonstrates how the entire Earth is split up into basically data points. And you can see that. And then what we have today, with just much more advanced technology, is exactly the same thing. This is Landsat 8, which is the same thing, which to us looks like a photograph, but it's actually exactly the same thing, the same principle as the thing on the other side. It's a whole bunch of readings of different land covers with different wavelengths, which we cannot see with our own eyes, and then represented into a much more dense, basically, graph is the only thing that you can call this. In exactly the same way that this is kind of an imagined image, so is this. So what we've done is created a huge number of, basically, you can call them hallucinations because they're not images we could see with our own eyes. And we all kind of treat them as real images. So our relationship here to the images that come from the technology is one we don't think about at all, because most people would say that this is a photograph. But more interestingly is that today, when we send spacecraft to things like the comets, which the ESA did, it landed there last year. This comet here, Philae, I don't know if you followed it in the news. For the first time, it has actual, apart from the rovers on Mars, that's also an interesting case, we now send cameras to these places, like actual cameras to take actual photographs. And it's less about the data we can gather from places, and it's more about the images that we can see, and kind of colonizing the rest of space by looking at it. So that is a massive shift just in the last 10 years. It goes less from measuring and more from seeing. And I think the role of the artist then becomes even further distance from this, because there's really nothing else you can do with these images. And the only space left for art and space is kind of a big question at the moment. And I think, for example, when you see that they're going to send an opera singer into the International Space Station, I think in 2018 or something, as the very first artist performance in space, I think that's totally ridiculous, because you don't do science experiments in space, which you could do here. That's the whole point of doing them in space, is that you're in a zero gravity environment with all kinds of conditions which you can't experience anywhere else. Yet we can put an opera singer in the building across the street, so why in the International Space Station? That seems absurd to me. So space, anyway, I'll come back to that later. But what I wanted to mostly talk about, I guess, was this research project I did at the beginning of this year in a residency, which focused exactly on this space here in Amsterdam, which you may or may not know. It's called the KNSM Islands. And today it's a residential island with, well, as you can see, a whole bunch of apartments. But it used to be one of the main ports of Amsterdam. The KNSM was a shipping company, and they both had freight to all around the world, especially South America, but also all the passenger ships which went down the coast of America to Asia, was all based in this island. So it was really a center of information in Amsterdam. So I spent 3 months just doing research. The idea was that you come up with some sort of proposal in this residency to make a public intervention or something like that, which I kind of did, but not exactly. But following from that research, I kind of developed a quite normative, I guess, history of communication. So it's based on a lot of research, often from academic sources, but then I'm still an artist, so I mean, a historian could go through the history of communication, but my job is to find a more interesting way of looking at the same information and finding something which I think has maybe more of a human or physical meaning or response, a different kind of beauty in it, let's say. So I might use the word beautiful a lot of times, but I don't mean something which is pretty and nice to look at. I mean something which makes you kind of get excited by something. So the very first way we used to communicate is by walking around. Did anyone see this film? The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yes.
Yeah. It's super nice. So he basically has to get rid of this Coke bottle. He's never seen a Coke bottle before, and he has to literally carry it over mountains and hills to throw it off the edge of the earth. And that's kind of how we used to tell stories or find information about our surroundings, just by walking and seeing things ourselves, telling it to a group of people, having a conversation about an object like a Coke bottle, which we might find. And then Mr. Oranges, yeah. And then we had a vehicle, so such as a ship in this case, which would carry many more objects from much further distances. So instead of going to Suriname, you see the oranges from Suriname, and you suddenly understand something about how far away things are in the world and what things are found there, and the extent of your own technology and society, as in it is able to go and grab things from other parts of the world and bring it to a single place in the city. And so this is the kind of same island with millions of tons of stuff going through it every single year, and just boxes and boxes of objects from the other side of the world, so that suddenly Amsterdam was able to do things like taste bananas and spices and build things with stone from other countries. And in that sense, there's a new frontier of information, a new influx of information which is reaching the city. And they're objects, as in you can use them and touch them, but more importantly, it's information about the rest of the world. So cities would be organized around this idea of bringing information through objects into them. And so the KNSM Island was kind of a pioneering place in the world, in that it was one of the first places which really closely integrated the harbour with the city in a way which allowed workers to come in through one side and kind of live amongst it. And it integrated the passenger ships with the cargo ships, and it, I think, really well understood that it was more about the information rather than the economic value of the stuff that was coming into the city. This island was presented in London at the trade show in 1908, I think, as amongst all of these technologies such as woodworking machines and leather machines and basically industrial stuff, the Netherlands presented this island as its industrial technology. And I think that's really interesting. And that, I already think, is really just a beautiful story. So the island was incredibly dense and full of activity, and this is a map of the routes that went to and from this island. And so you can see how international that is. I'll get back to that one later. But then at some point we invented the cable, and the cable kind of disrupted this model of sending information through objects, in that things now travel at almost the speed of light. And because it's through a cable, the only 2 points which actually matter is the A and the B, the beginning point and the end point, and not what's in between, because it travels so fast that it's beyond being described as human. Yet with this same kind of attitude or philosophy of centralizing things into a single point, we ended up with these kind of monstrous constructions like in Stockholm, this is 1902 or something. The telegraph network was the most advanced in the world there at that time, except they hadn't yet figured out how to put multiple signals on one cable. So basically every single building in the entire city is linked with a cable to this tower, which is then linked to every single other building in the city. So millions and millions and millions of cables are just attached to this thing, this new port of information in the center of the city. And obviously it's very heavy, so it collapsed all the time. I think that's really, every single winter there's ice on the cables, and so things just collapse. And I think that's really more than just visual or physical in meaning. It's really kind of symbolic failure of the thing. The thing is conceptually far too heavy, collapsed, so it was pulled down. This tower was actually there until 1960 or something as a kind of monument, but it burnt down. It's the it's just called the telephone tower in Swedish, but I don't remember what that is because I don't speak Swedish. But there's lots and lots of images of this, and especially lots and lots of images of the tests they did on the collapsing of the pylons. It's very interesting. You have that hint. The cable. So I'm calling it a history, but obviously we still have ships and we still have cables and so on. But that's why you have to be a bit flexible, or why I could call it a normative history. But it's basically the history of, I guess, the leading edge of the way that we transmit information. So today we now have internet, and as you know, the cables are all run under the sea, and that looks a lot like it used to, except everything's much, much faster. And instead of carrying information about very specific objects, what we have basically done is created a very complicated network which doesn't connect A's and B's, it connects every A to every B. And now, instead of relaying things to a central point, everything is connected to everything. So in the island, where you had an entire world of information from the reaches of this network, you now have entire universe of information. Every single point of our information network as humans is accessible from this island. But not only that, is that with the invention of wireless technology, I will skip some things because it's not that necessary. With the invention of wireless information, now every single home has a Wi-Fi network, which means that not only do we have an entire universe of information in the island, we have an entire universe of information in every single home and every single person's pocket. So the trend from people walking as human beings to carry information towards this current trend where entire